The East African Community EAC Regional Force has begun deploying boots across one of the most volatile pockets on earth in the neighboring state of the eastern DRC, where millions have been slaughtered and displaced and thousands raped in the last decades. Burundi was the first to send troops into South Kivu in August, while Kenyan special forces on a reconnaissance mission have been deployed at Ishasha that lies at the DRC and Kanungu district border. The plank of this operation is two-pronged. It is meant to find a peaceful settlement with the armed groups who will be demobilized and integrated into the national army. If this option fails, the regional force will then rely on military means in an attempt to annihilate these armed groups. Kenya, which occupies a neutral position, has been given the overall duty to coordinate the regional force, while Uganda has been assigned the logistics role, as Rwanda, whose troops are restricted from entering the territory of its implacable adversary, have been handed the intelligence role. Questions abound about the interoperability of the different armies whose geopolitical interests often clash. How will Uganda and Burundi prioritize the regional forces mission and be able to separately pursue peculiar interests against the Allied Democratic Forces (ADF) and the Red Tabara rebel groups respectively? How will the East African Community Force be integrated into other fighting forces, including the LEMDAC United Nations Organization mission into the DRC, MONUSCO, and the Force Intervention Brigade, FIB, led by SADC, and foreign armies who are illegally deployed into DRC? How will Rwanda, which has been accused of propping up the M23 rebels, react in regard to the ever-present threat from the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, in North Kivu? These are some of the questions that new entrants such as Kenya will be confronted with as they are sucked into an asymmetrical warfare with hundreds of AK-47 carrying militias festooned with belts of cartridges. The eastern DRC has over 150 rebel militias roaming the vast green jungles, exploiting the Kinshasa government weaknesses such as poverty, intrastate violence, and inequitable distribution of wealth, amongst others. Some of these militias pay allegiance to the Kinshasa government, while others are cahoots with regional rebel groups and fund their enterprise by imposing taxes on the locals and exploiting the wealth buried in the mineral-rich bowels of Kivu. Professor Philip Kasaija, a regional security expert and academic in international affairs, says the mandate handed to regional forces to build a cohesive unit that can defeat armed groups if the option of a peaceful settlement is rejected. But Kasaija fears that the deployment could be a knee-jerk reaction to the M23 rebel group's re-emergence. He opines that the region has previously authored a number of security blueprints and frameworks to stabilize DRC, but they continue to gather dust on the shelves. The process that culminated in the signing of the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the DRC and the region on 24 February 2013 was based on the vision of leaders within the region and the international community to address the underlying causes of recurrent violent conflict in eastern DRC. Past efforts to neutralize armed groups that operate in eastern DRC did not fully achieve the desired results, thus threatening the peace, security, and development of the entire region. It was agreed that all armed groups be neutralized, and the Peace Pact sought to improve collaboration among member states within the existing regional security mechanisms and to accelerate measures to restore and consolidate state authority in eastern DRC, increase efforts to roll out the DRC-DDR national plan, and fast-track economic programs to address youth unemployment in the region. However, the M23 rebels resumed fighting in late 2021 after a hiatus. They've now captured large swaths of territory in North Kivu province, including the strategic town of Bunagana on Ugandan border in June. The group's resurgence has cast a pall over the war-weary region as Kinshasa continues to accuse its neighbor Rwanda of backing the militia. On Sunday, M23 fighters captured the village of Ntamuganga in North Kivu's Rushuru area, according to local officials. A 131-page report by United Nations Security Council experts found Rwanda launched military interventions inside Congolese territory since at least November 2021, providing, and I quote, troop reinforcements for specific M23 operations, in particular when these aimed at seizing strategic towns and areas. Yolande Makolo, Rwanda's government spokesperson, said in a statement the government would not comment on, and I quote, unpublished and unvalidated report. She said an earlier report by the experts group in June, and I quote, contained none of these false allegations. On October 20th, 2022, 3 United States senators authored a letter to the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen seeking sanctions against those giving material and financial support to M23. The letter partly reads, and I quote, credible reports by established human rights organizations indicate that M23 has a regular supply of modern arms and ammunition that allows its members to regularly strike targets over long distances and execute precision fires against aircraft, suggesting direct state-sponsored support. Given the years and degree of human suffering in eastern Congo, we ask for an update on ongoing enforcement of U.S. sanctions against M23 as required by public law. The letter further reads, and I quote, since the beginning of this year, more than 700,000 people have been forced to flee their homes, with many civilian deaths. Human rights organizations have tracked cases of torture, rape and imprisoned civilians forcibly made to engage in cannibalism with their murdered fellow prisoners. These horrific reports come as M23 displays offensive capabilities more in line with the conventional army. A regional security analyst, Frederick Chiseka Ntale, opines that the deployment of the regional force offers the East African community an institutional framework to deal with insecurity.
In one way, the East African Standby Force, in the context of East Africa as a regional economic community, is trying to make itself relevant. In most simplistic terms, it is trying to copy what ECOMOG in the Economic Committee of West African States is doing. Meaning that for us to have a reliable regional economic community, we must also foster peace and security within the community. So in a very interesting way and in a very serious way, the East African Standby Force is trying to make itself a very relevant and action-oriented force. So this time, going under the East African Standby Force is trying to diffuse the individual armies that would go to Congo as protecting their own boundaries and protecting their own regional interests. So the East African Standby Force gives some kind of institutionalized regional economic cooperation in trying to solve a common problem within our region. But
he says that this lifts the responsibility of policing DRC partly away from Western powers.
But there is more to that. By the East African Standby Force going to the Congo, it is in more ways speaking to Africa being able to solve some of its problems. Because Congo has in more ways been an occupation of Western powers. You have a UN force that is almost there endlessly. You have other powers who would contribute to the force. And of course, you have got other informal forces, private armies occupying there, some from as far as Russia, some from as far as Israel, some from Angola, operating within a private way.
He, however, fears that the deployment might be used as a veil to steal the resources of the mineral-rich neighboring state.
I mean, knowing it within the big arena of international politics and how countries steal like bandits, the cover could help countries who would want to steal like bandits to do their stealing, but under a very formalized situation.
In December 2021, the UPDF deployed its troops inside the DRC after inking a deal with Kinshasa, allowing the troops to hunt down the Islamist Allied Democratic Forces rebels, accused of using the neighboring state as a sanctuary to sow mayhem in Uganda. At the commencement of the deployment, a political history scholar, Professor Ogenga Otunu, argued that the primary objectives of the UPDF deployment may have little to do with pursuing terrorism.
Is one, since the ADF has allied itself with a number of militias in the DRC, in the eastern DRC, attack on the ADF means attack on a number of the militias in the eastern DRC. And some of the militias are being funded and supported by some of the neighboring countries. Okay, that's why you have accusation, counter-accusation. Burundi and Uganda saying Rwanda is the one supporting militias, rebel groups that are based in the DRC that have plans to attack them. Rwanda says the same thing. Uganda and Burundi are funding and supporting them, some of the militias there. And some of the militias are fairly autonomous, okay, because they're fighting either to try and control the state or to try and control the minerals in the territory. So there is a possibility that even if you went after the ADF, and it becomes difficult to define what the ADF looks like.
He viewed it as an attempt by the Ugandan government to try and salvage its national legitimacy by making itself the kingmaker in a troubled region. There were also fears that given a history of hostilities and mutual suspicion of EAC member states, this could morph into a full-blown regional conflict.
Even before we went into the DRC, one of the strategies the present president of the DRC, Felix, attempted to do when he came to power was to build some alliances and understanding with all the neighbors. To the extent that the president began to talk directly with Uganda, with Burundi, with Rwanda, to try and find out a way to allow the three countries that claim that rebels that from time to time attack them come from the eastern DRC, to allow them to go into the DRC. The president was beginning to discuss that with them to the extent that he was even willing to allow all the three countries to send in their troops alongside the soldiers from the DRC. So when the attack took place, it took place at a time when the conversation was really taking place. The biggest fear at the time was not Uganda going to DRC, Rwanda going to DRC, Burundi going to DRC, was really the possibility of having a proxy war in the DRC.
For now, the UPDF remains holed up in the eastern DRC under the recently appointed Major General Dick Olum, a military officer with consummate skills at the battlefront. It is not clear yet how the Ugandan army plans to dovetail its objectives with those of the East African Community Regional Force as the fog of war in the DRC continues to thicken.